All right, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have about Oregon climate bills in 2021. My name is Brian Stewart. I'm going to be co-hosting with my partner Joe Wachunas. We're both from Electrify Now. We've got a great lineup of panelists who I'll introduce in just a moment. But all of these people have deep knowledge about the subject, which is always good. Today, what we're hoping to give you all is a little bit of a overview of some of the key environmental bills that are being kind of elevated by the environmental community for this session. And we're going to spend a particular chunk of time on the three key bills that have been kind of voted on by the environmental community as the most important ones for the session. So that'll be the majority of our topic, but we'll also be giving a broad overview of what to expect and what some of the other really interesting pieces of legislation are that are going to move us all forward towards our goals of reducing climate impact. Before we get started, I want to give a little shout out to our coalition members. We have a growing number of organizations that are nonprofits, some from the building community, the HVAC installers. We have faith-based organizations, community-based organizations, and others, and all of us dedicated one way or another to helping to educate and advocate for electrification and climate-friendly policies and help people just take actions in their own lives. So I want to give a shout out to our members. All these organizations help us put these webinars on. Particular shout out to Protect Our Winners, the newest member of our growing coalition. And if anyone out there represents an organization that might be interested in joining our group, we'd be happy to give you more information on that. I think we have our emails in the chat. You can email either Joe or I, and we can give you some information on what that looks like and how it might benefit your organization.
Great, and we of course want to draw your attention to all of our previous webinars. If you just Google Electrify Now YouTube or go to our website electrifynow.net, we've got all these educational resources on induction cooking, heat pump water heaters. We bring technical experts so that you can learn about these technologies and how to make your home electric. So please check them out. And you might be seeing in the chat, I've been putting a lot of links for our upcoming webinars. Next month in February, we're doing renewable hydrogen with the Renewable Hydrogen Alliance and Bonneville Environmental Foundation. I'll put in a link shortly. And then we're just announcing this week, something we've been working on for a while. In the second week of March, from March 8th to March 12th, we're going to be doing our first, hopefully annual sequestration week. So we're going to be we're going to do a webinar every day for the week and on a different topic related to sequestration. The first day will be on carbon capture and storage, and then forests, then grasslands, then green concrete and soil. So we're really excited. We have incredible panelists. Check out the links in the chat room or go to our website, electrifynow.net, and join us for this week. We're really excited to be talking about this all important topic.
A lot of you, thank you very much, have made donations today to the Electrify Everyone Fund. I think we have a record. We got over $500 of donations today, which is fantastic. So thank you all. And if you didn't, I think you might be interested to know about this. It's a really interesting program that we're running with our partners at Community Energy Project. And with your donations, we're able to install free heat pump water heaters in homes with old gas water heaters and save these low-income qualified households a lot of money on their electric bills and also avoid carbon at the same time. It's a great program. Check it out at communityenergyproject.org. And again, thank you for all those who have donated. All right, let me introduce our fantastic panelists. We are going to start off with Julia DeGraw from OLCV. If you're not familiar with the Oregon League of Conservation Voters, it's a fantastic organization that helps make sure we've got climate-friendly legislators in office, and also doing great work policy advocacy for policies that ensure that we have clean air and water, protect our forests, and provide the renewable energy future that we are all looking for. Julia is the coordinator for efforts to kind of basically get all the environmental community together to really effectively advocate around key policy. And as such, she has a really good kind of broad view of what's going on this session. And that's what she's going to be talking about. And we'll start off with her, and then we'll hand it off to Oriana Magnera from another great organization that if you're not familiar with the Verde, I would ask you to check them out. They excellent community-based organization here, does a lot of work around climate justice and policy. And Oriana is the Energy, Climate, and Transportation Policy Coordinator. So she's been very involved with the 3 key bills that we're going to be talking about that are the priorities for this session. And that's what she will be focused on. And then we also have Morgan Gratz-Weiser from OEC, another fantastic organization devoted to helping pass really important policies to protect our environment and also safeguard our future and give us a good economy. And Morgan has really great background, not only working in the as a staff member in the Senate, but as a lawyer to make sure that we have the kind of policies that we need. And she's going to be kind of behind the scenes a little bit for this upfront part. But if you have questions about any of these things, put them in the chat. Morgan will be watching that. And then as we get to the end, we really are expecting to have a good, healthy chunk of time on Q&A, and Morgan will be joining us for that as well, in case you have any detailed questions on any of these policy matters. So thanks. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Julia to take us into the overview. Julia, you're on mute there.
Oh my goodness, I'm one of those people who did the mute thing. Hello, everybody. My name is Julia DeGraw. I use she, her pronouns, and thank you all for making time for this today. And thank you, Oriana, for leading on the slides. I really appreciate it. So I wanted to, this is the outline of what I'll be covering today. I want to do a quick intro of who I am and what OLCV is and the Oregon Conservation Network. I want to give a little bit of context about where we're at with climate legislation and the legislature, how we got here real briefly. And then I'm going to do a quick overview of some, not all, of the climate related bills that we're going to be working on in the legislature this year, and then transition by announcing what our top key climate priorities are, which happen to be exactly the climate priorities that Oriana is going to be doing a deep dive on with you guys. So I will just really quickly to outline OLCV is the Oregon League of Conservation Voters. I'm their coalition director, and part of my work there is to run the Oregon Conservation Network, which is a coalition of 35 organizations that come together every legislative session to identify top priorities for environmental and conservation legislation. And this is my first time doing this. It was first full session. I got hired about 7 months ago. So I'm really excited to be diving into this work. And I'll just be real clear that at the end of my presentation, I will open it up for Morgan real quick to fill in any gaps I might have missed, because she is doing a deeper dive and working on kind of more of the nitty gritty details of these pieces of legislation I'm going to be going over on a really high level. So in terms of context, as many of you are aware, the Oregon State Legislature has failed to pass broad sweeping climate legislation for the past decade. There have been major efforts to try to pass big legislation, and as we can recall, particularly the most recent full session when Republicans walked out, it really killed a lot of really important climate bills, including the Clean Energy Jobs Bill, which would have had broad sweeping impacts across sectors on getting closer to really important decarbonization goals. Since that bill and any sweeping legislation has not passed at this point, Governor Brown took really strong action by passing an executive order. We also call that the Oregon Climate Action Plan. So if we say OCAP or the EO, we're talking about that executive order that the governor issued after that session that really helps get us closer to our climate goals. What's really important is making sure that the executive order is implemented well, and that the programs that have to be created are funded by the state legislature. So one of the major priorities moving into 2021 is making sure that the executive order programs are funded, and that we're passing legislation that frankly fills in the gaps of the executive order. The executive order does not 100% get us there. And because we don't have broad sweeping climate legislation that we've passed that affects every single sector, we have a bunch of bills that go sector by sector that are going to help get us to our climate goals. And this is frankly what the legislature has been set up to do because of that kind of history of not being able to pass like broad sweeping legislation in the past. And something else I think that's worth noting, COVID has definitely dramatically changed how the legislature is functioning. It's creating a lot of uncertainty, it's creating a sense of scarcity, and there is actual scarcity based on the climate, on the economic ramifications of this pandemic. So legislators are, in a lot of cases, a little bit cautious feeling or wary of passing lots of bills. And we're just reminding them, hey, we can't do nothing on climate. A lot of these bills would have passed in previous sessions had Republicans not walked out. So they're kind of low-hanging fruit. You had the votes then, you should still have them now. But this is kind of how we talk about the climate legislation that exists in the 2021 session, is that while it looks like a lot of bills, some of them are easy to pass. They would have passed earlier had there not been the walkout. And so we're trying to make it, we're trying to tell this narrative to legislators so it's a lot easier for them to recognize that this is how we get there on climate. It has to be numerous bills. Next slide, please. So the sectors we were kind of talking about here are transportation, buildings, curbing pollutants, land use, and a just transition to clean energy, which is going to largely be covered in the next section. So next slide. So under transportation, and this is where I do want to emphasize, there's probably other bills under transportation, the ones that groups within the Oregon Conservation Network are focusing on. These are two of them. So the EV incentives would extend state EV incentive program, which is set to expire in 2023, and including low income incentives for new and used EVs or electric vehicles. And this policy also enshrines utilities' role in installing EV charging infrastructure. So, and this is one of the bills that would have passed in a previous session had there not been a walkout. So it's kind of like they had the votes, they should still have the votes. This is just kind of like, let's get it done. EV ready building codes is another one of those bills that was ready to go. They had the votes and they weren't able to get it done because of Republican shenanigans. So the EV ready building codes requires all new residential and commercial developments be built ready to support EV chargers by October 2022. So this is really trying to get at that all new construction, being prepared for the future of electrification. And again, it's just, they had the votes in the last session, they should still have the votes now. They should just pass them. So those are two on transportation. Next section. Cleaner, healthier, and more efficient buildings. This is information I think a lot of folks don't necessarily know, although maybe folks on this call do. But buildings are actually a source of a lot of inefficiency and can be a source of a lot of greenhouse gas pollutants. So we have, and you'll notice here that some of these bills have bill numbers and some of them don't, because some of them are still in concept form, but we're expecting them to become bills. I tried to include bill numbers where I knew we had them. So yes, the energy efficient local building codes, or the REACH code option, allows cities and counties to adopt REACH codes. And what this is getting at is that the state has their minimum requirement for energy efficiency. And if at the state level, they want to do, they can do 10% better than that baseline requirement. Municipalities are currently preempted from going to that reach code option for their energy efficiency. So this would just extend that ability to have the reach code option to the municipalities in Oregon. So it's a really, we feel like it should be a must-pass bill for 2021. And then there's the appliance efficiency bill, which would increase energy efficiency standards for new appliances, which is something that is another one of those kind of like small bills, but it's like really important to get it done. This is how we actually are going to, start to meet our goals, and also help save ratepayers money by having more energy efficient appliances. It just it works for us across the board. It's an equity issue as well. And then the Energy Trust of Oregon. When people talk about the ETO, that's what they're talking about, the Energy Trust of Oregon. There's so many acronyms floating around that I'm frankly still learning. So this bill would extend the public purpose charge to ensure the utility and Energy Trust of Oregon programs for renewables and energy efficiency continues. They do really important work, and we want to make sure that that's able to continue. This is another bill that would have been passed in a previous session had it not been for the Republican walkout. So it's really viewed as something that definitely needs to pass in this session. We can move on to the next slide. This one's going to be super short because there's like shockingly good news from the federal level, which, I mean, how often do we get to say that in the previously, we can now call the past Trump era. But we had a bill, and there is still a bill that exists to phase out hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs, which are a chemical. They're used in refrigerants and like air conditioners. It's an extremely potent greenhouse gas that is just needs to be phased out in order for us to meet our goals for greenhouse gas emissions. And fun update, Congress actually passed legislation that will do this, that will phase out HFCs. So it kind of takes the pressure off of trying to have another bill on the laundry list of bills we need to pass at the Oregon State Legislature. So that is just some good news. Next slide. Whoops. Sorry, that's not formatted very well. Apologies for that. So this is the equity and climate in land use. It's it's just a standalone bill that is being led by Beyond Toxics and the NAACP, I believe Eugene. This is a really brief outline of what the bill does. There's a link there for where you can find out more information about the bill. But it basically would enshrine into Oregon law that the Oregon Land Conservation and Development Commission would need to take into account equity and climate issues when they're making their land use decisions. And it really outlines exactly how that can be done. And this is just a partial list of all the things the bill does, which is form an EJ advisory committee to advise the LCDC on how to do this work. And that committee would be diverse and representative of impacted communities and underserved communities and BIPOC communities. Requires interim standards for LCDC to follow to help Oregon meet its climate goals. It would amend statewide land use planning goals to include addressing climate change and promoting participation of historically underserved communities. And it would also ultimately, once all of this is finalized, it would codify that LCDC must consider equity and climate in all of its land use decisions moving forward. So it's a pretty transformative piece of legislation, and we're expecting to support it. And Beyond Toxics, is a member of the Oregon Conservation Network, and I'm expecting this to be a bill of support. You move on to the next slide. So yes, the Just Transition to Clean Energy for All. We have a series of bills here. The Energy Affordability bill is something that Oriana will be going way more into depth on, but it basically ensures that utilities will be able to offer protections to low-income utility ratepayers. And this is really important because we have a priority of passing 100% clean energy for all bill. And there's a concern that that might cause rates to go up, which means we need to make sure that we're protecting low-income ratepayers as we pass that legislation. So that's part of a package of bills. And then the other part of that package is Healthy Homes, which is to increase efficiency and weatherization of homes for low-income families. This became a really huge issue during the wildfires when air quality was obviously really, really bad, not just outside, but inside people's homes. Healthy homes really help increase the health of families and increase and help lower their energy bills. So it's also an equity issue. So the energy affordability, healthy homes, and 100% clean are part of a clean energy opportunity package of bills that Oriana is going to be doing the deep dive on. And then lastly, here we have Buy Clean, Buy Fair, which would ensure public projects utilize sustainably manufactured products and try to buy them local and support local workforces in these local projects. So those are those bills at a very high level. Next slide. I just wanted to really quickly mention, I represent all of the issues the Oregon Conservation Network wants to work on. So all the information from these slides and that I've been talking about has really come from Climate Solutions, the Oregon Environmental Council, and Beyond Toxics, who are all part of the Oregon Conservation Network. They all worked really hard to help form these bills and will continue working hard to help pass them. And I'm really excited to be working with all of them. Next slide. And I just wanted to announce here that one of the priorities for the Oregon Conservation Network for the 2021 session is the Clean Energy Opportunity Package of Bills, which I just outlined before, but the 100% clean energy for all, energy affordability, and healthy homes. And with that, I think I'm literally at my 15 minutes. But Morgan, please, if I left anything out or misconstrued anything, please take a moment to speak up now before we pass it off to Oriana.
Morgan's been hard at work in the chat. We've had a lot of energy in the chat. Thank you for everyone who's been asking questions. And Morgan, you're on mute right now, but I know there's one question here about fuel switching, and there is a bill that should enable us to provide funding to improve the efficiency of appliances, regardless of what fuel was being used initially in those homes. So I know that fuel switching is a topic that's near and dear to a lot of people here. And yes, there is a bill that addresses that somewhat. Morgan might have more details about that, but Morgan, did you have anything else that you wanted to add here?
Hi, sorry. No, I'm good at this point. Happy to answer additional questions as they come in. And thank you, Julia, for that overview.
Yeah, it was a lot to cover in a short period of time, but I just wanted to give you the list of bills and a vague idea of what they're about.
Yeah, maybe one last comment before we hand it off to Oriana here, but I think I can see from the energy in the chat, there's a lot of desire for action here, which is fantastic to see. And I think we all share your concern for getting things done here. I think I have to say that I am encouraged that all these bills, a lot of them on their own, you look at them and they look like they're very narrow perhaps, but when you add them all up, the impact that they have to tilt the playing field in favor of the solutions that are really going to change things, renewable energy, these electrification options, less polluting options. Every one of these bills, does that. It nudges the playing field. I like to think of it this way: it tilts things in a direction where market forces are going to be even more effective to help propel change. So I'm encouraged by this kind of web of individual bills that Julia was describing here that adds up to something big. And then, when you couple that with what we're going to hear next from Oriana, I think adds up to a lot if we can get these things passed.
I would just add real quickly that the governor's executive order does a whole lot that frees us up from not having to pass big legislation, right? And so the next big thing is what Oriana is going to talk about, and that's where we're getting the next big transformative bill. The bills I was going over are the things that help augment a very strong executive order, and the fight there is just making sure that it's actually implemented well, but that doesn't happen in the legislature, that happens in the rulemaking process. So I just want you to know that there's a whole other universe there in the executive order realm, where really hard work is happening to make sure that we're making major progress on climate. So I don't want you to feel like these bills are the be all end all on climate progress. The executive order is huge, and this 100% clean package is also huge. So with that, we should pass it on.
Yes.
All right. Thanks for that really fantastic overview, Julia. And thanks to Morgan for providing a little bit of extra support, especially in the chat, answering some of the great questions that are coming in. I'm here today to talk about the Oregon Clean Energy Opportunity Campaign. And as was mentioned earlier, my name is Oriana Magnera. I'm the Energy, Climate, and Transportation Manager at Verde. I use she, her pronouns. And my organization, Verde, is part of a campaign led by environmental justice organizations, with support from strong ally organizations like OLCV and OEC, to ensure that we have a path to a cleaner and more equitable energy future for Oregon that creates opportunities for all communities. Before I talk a little bit more about the campaign, I do just want to give a little bit of context for my organization. Verde operates out of the Cully neighborhood in Portland, which is the neighborhood closest to the airport for folks who aren't in the Portland metro area. And for a little bit of context about what the experience of living in Cully is for many folks, we're the neighborhood nearest the airport. Our office is across a diesel trucking corridor from a rail line. And we also have the Owens Brackway glass recycling facility. And in addition to that, we have an asphalt grinding facility. So it's an environmental justice community, which means that the folks who live there are disproportionately impacted by these environmental health hazards and have a different quality of life as a result than folks who don't live in communities that where these kinds of sources can be cited. And many of the folks, as in many environmental justice communities who live in the Cully neighborhood, are Black, Indigenous, or other people of color, mostly Latinx and Indigenous in the Cully neighborhood, and mostly folks with lower incomes. Cully is a neighborhood without a lot of sidewalks or infrastructure, and that my organization was formed about 15 years to address some of those issues and to ensure that infrastructure improvements like rain gardens could reach a community like Cully, but not cause displacement because home values went up and rent would go up and people would have to move and destabilize their communities. So in addition to setting up a social enterprise to do landscaping work, and in particular to install rain gardens in the Cully community and others, Verde also developed energy work, and that's culminated in an energy plan for the Cully neighborhood, in which we're using conservation and generation and education projects to help people to stay in their homes through lower energy bills, to ensure that people can build wealth through cooperative ownership opportunities of energy projects, to ensure that folks have healthy and safe housing through manufactured home replacement, and to ensure resiliency for community, not just from a disaster preparedness perspective and the benefits that can come from putting storage on a solar project, as we've done in a church, and that's the middle picture there, but also ensuring that community stability is achieved and a community can be resilient on multiple levels. So that's what brings us to this work and really grounds us in the values of what we're doing. And before talking about what the campaign does, which I'm sure folks are very excited to hear, and what action we're trying to take on climate this session. I know there's a lot of energy in the chat around that. I want to talk about why now, and not just because we're in a climate crisis, but we're also in a crisis of a global health pandemic that has led to more folks spending time in their homes, which means energy bills are going up as people use more energy in their homes, but many people are losing their jobs or losing income, which means the share of someone's income that goes towards their energy bills, which is called energy burden, is increasing. And that impact is increasing in the COVID crisis, but was already exacerbated for folks with lower incomes, for mostly Black and Indigenous communities, people living in manufactured or low-income multifamily housing. The folks who are already impacted by energy burden have been impacted even further, and that's of concern. And at the end of the day, the work that we're doing, it's about climate broadly, but it's also about people. It's about community. It's about helping people to see themselves in the work that we do. And not just for communities in Portland that we serve, but every community in the state, we believe, has a right and an opportunity to have affordable energy, to have a healthy and safe home to live in, and to be able to develop energy projects that help make their communities more resilient in the way that the Kali Energy Plan is making our communities in Kali more resilient. So now, what is the Oregon Clean Energy Opportunity Campaign? The goals of the campaign are decreasing utility costs, which can be achieved through allowing for different rate structures, like a discount or a special rate class to address energy burden, creating good local jobs in the renewable energy sector that have good benefits, that have good protections, and that create apprenticeship opportunities, especially for BIPOC folks, for femmes, and for persons with disabilities or veterans, the folks who are often shut out of many different job markets, but especially have not been well represented in the renewable energy space. We also want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the electricity sector by achieving 100% renewable or carbon-free energy by 2040. And also increasing rural opportunities and tribal community opportunities by ensuring that all utilities are covered by this proposal, and not just the requirements, but also the opportunities that are created don't just exist in investor-owned utility territory, which is Portland General Electric, Pacific Power, and Idaho Power are big utilities, but also in the smaller areas. And I think someone noted in the chat, I think it was Jim Kreider, hi Jim, who noted that many of the bills that get passed often leave out the COU territory. So we're really trying to take that into account in our organizing and in our policymaking. And in the process, we want to develop leadership in frontline communities. We've hosted an Energy Justice Leadership Institute in which about 120 community members from around the state and truly from many counties in the state, not everyone was represented, but pretty close, participated in an institute to learn about energy and energy policy in Oregon. It occurred in both English and Spanish with simultaneous translation and interpretation services provided. And other accessibility needs addressed to really ensure an inclusive space in which folks could learn about energy. And then the second phase of that is actually kicking off tonight, and those folks will move on to be grassroots advocates around energy policy work in the state. And we're not trying to do this with just one campaign. We're trying to build power, pun very much intended, politically and literally, for communities and really build relationship across communities around the state through this campaign instead of just trying to pass a policy. And this is not an exhaustive list of the organizations who've been involved in kind of the steering and executive committees of this campaign, but you can get a sense of the breadth of organizations and the kinds of communities who are represented. And then of course, there are many allied organizations, as I mentioned, OLCB and OEC are providing really incredible technical and lobbying support to this campaign to help it move forward. And just want to honor those organizations also for allowing for some of the discomfort that comes up with frontline leadership and kind of shifting that power from who has traditionally been setting the table around climate and energy policy, and allowing some new organizations to do a little bit of an experiment and see how far we can get in a way that really leads with the values and impacts that we want to see for our communities. So the three bills that we're working on are 100% clean energy for all, and I'll go through all of these in more detail, but just so you can get the broad scope, that's House Bill 2995, energy affordability, House Bill 2475, and Healthy Homes, House Bill 2842. And so starting with the Energy Affordability Bill, House Bill 2475, it will create rate structures or programs to reduce energy burden by allowing the Public Utility Commission to have the authority to then allow utilities to provide those different kinds of rate designs within its regulatory authority to address energy burden for low-income and environmental justice or other underserved communities. It also ensures that these rates are non-bypassable, which means the direct access customers, those folks who aren't receiving retail electricity but buying their own power on the market, still have some responsibility to ensure that energy burden is an equitably addressed issue in our energy system. It also allows for an expansion of intervener funding, which is the funding that currently goes to organizations like the Citizens Utility Board and the Association of Western Energy Consumers, who represent broad ratepayer classes, respectively residential ratepayers and industrial ratepayers. but acknowledging that environmental justice communities often have very specific needs that should be advocated for in a Public Utility Commission space, but that aren't well represented by any broad class. So it says the folks who know best should be at the table, and they should be shaping what a low-income discount or rate class looks like. They should be shaping other policies and programs in meaningful and impactful ways. And just to give a sense of the need, this map was created as part of Oregon Department of Energy's biennial energy plan. And so this data is from, I think, 2019. And it shows an incredible need in our state. When you look at just how hot this heat map is of impacts and energy inaffordability. And this is pre-COVID, which is why I was giving that context of data. And it's probably much worse right now for folks who are feeling that impact. That kind of slide I showed with some of the headlines about COVID and energy bills providing impacts. And in particular, Southeastern Oregon, which is mostly rural, mostly low income, is one of our most impacted part of the states, with 40 to 50% of people at 200% below federal poverty line living in energy burden, which to me is just an astronomical number and really gives the drive to pass this bill. We've tried to do it for 2 sessions. We were 2 days away from passing before session fell apart last time around. And we're really, really committed to making it happen so that folks can get those resources that they need in this COVID moment when it's more important than ever to have every tool in the toolbox to address energy burden. The path of the bill goes from the House Energy and Environment Committee, and there will be a hearing on the 1st from 1 to 3 p.m. So this coming Monday, there'll be opportunities to submit testimony. We're encouraging folks who aren't from frontline communities. So that would be rural, BIPOC, folks with lower incomes or low wealth, people with disabilities, seniors, youth. If you don't identify as any of those folks, to submit written testimony and show up and be supportive, but to allow space so that we can really help our Energy Justice Leadership Institute participants and other frontline community members to tell their stories about why energy affordability is important. It will then go on to the House floor. A work session should be scheduled the following week, and on to the new Senate Energy and Environment Committee and on to the Senate floor. We have a bipartisan bill, Representative Zika from the Redmond area, who's a Republican, and we've worked with a lot over the past few years to shape this concept. Enthusiastically wanted to sign on this time around. And that's an incredible honor that he is so excited about this bill and so excited to partner and to have a bipartisan bill that's addressing such an important issue. So the next bill is Healthy Homes 2842. That bill will create a Healthy Homes program and a Healthy Homes Repair Fund within the Oregon Health Authority. And I think someone in the chat had mentioned the importance of funding for public health. This isn't broad public health funding as it relates to climate, but it is a more narrow scope in terms of how the climate crisis affects housing and how it affects weather. And in particular, some of the repair opportunities that can be used with this funding include air filtration systems and fire hardening or other things to just address the fact that the climate crisis is causing worsening wildfire seasons that are impacting our communities and were particularly bad and harmful this year. So we want to make sure that in addition to funding that can be used to repair a hole in the wall or a leak in the roof or remove carpet that is trapping asthma triggers or mold, that we can do some of these other structural repairs around visibility, seismic upgrades, and addressing that fire hardening issue that I mentioned. It also just ensures better coordination. Oregon Housing and Community Services administers our weatherization program, which is for insulation, duct sealing, and heating and cooling systems only, or air leakage sealing as well can be used, but can't be used in this more expansive way. So we want to make sure that funds are well braided and that when a home has need, every single thing that needs to be updated to give somebody a healthy and safe home can be addressed. And one of the reasons this is important is it helps people to spend less money on heating and cooling. It addresses that outdoor-indoor air quality mixing issue that came up during the fires this year and ensures safe indoor air quality through air filtration systems. It means folks have fewer sick days and emergency room visits. We currently spend $28 million a year on asthma-related ER visits, which is an astronomical number. And one of the reasons that we're asking for $20 million for a biennium to fill this fund. which is also equivalent to the annual spend of weatherization programs for CAP agencies, who are the anti-poverty agencies who administer those HCS dollars around weatherization. And at the end of the day, we also just want to create a lot of good local jobs and communities to do this retrofitting work. This bill starts in housing. Zika is also signed onto it, so it's an additional bipartisan bill that we're working on. And I believe the hearing will be, it's not scheduled yet, but the 11th of February, and another good opportunity to support a really important concept and the leadership of frontline organizations in this work. And finally, I think the bill folks are probably most excited to hear about is House Bill 2995, 100% clean energy for all. And this bill establishes a 100% clean energy standard. The current language is from 2035 onward. 100% of Oregon's electricity must be generated using renewable or emissions-free resources. And I think someone asked a biomass question in the chat. Biomass will be allowed at the small kind of community heating or project level scale, but with a lot of really strong sideboards, because we acknowledge that there's a lot of harmful air quality that can come from biomass projects, but also community benefits. So we're trying to balance the two things. And then maximizing community benefits like jobs and resiliency and community energy investments in the process. So just a breakdown of kind of the broad scope, this would be an emissions reduction standard rather than a procurement standard. So rather than saying utilities, you have to go get 100% of your energy from these sources, we're saying starting in 2030, you have to be at 80% below a baseline of 2010 to 2012 emissions levels, and then retrieve 100% emissions free. And that's not 100% below that baseline. It's 100% emissions free energy by 2035. That's actually probably more likely to land at 2040, given current negotiations. It would ensure some language around resiliency, community-based energy requirements to ensure that utilities are procuring and acquiring storage of different scales, other resiliency upgrades like microgrids or islanding, and community-based energy projects like cooperatively owned solar projects or community solar, and ensures good labor standards, a strong pathway to decarbonization in our electricity sector, and then also addresses some issues around FSEC siting checklists to ensure that they're working for communities well, and ensures that tribal rights are considered through government to government relationships and energy policy. To ensure that tribal governments are well considered, and that impacts to cultural resources do not become a harm that comes from some of the projects that will be built in order to achieve the goals of this bill. That bill starts in the House Energy and Environment Committee. Power, Marsh, and then FAM are the current sponsors. And we're working with a much broader table of legislators, including Senator Dembrow and Rep. Helm, who's also working on 100% concept to kind of hone things down and get the strongest bill possible that also brings along as many people and interests in the energy space as we possibly can to have a really smooth path forward and a really strong piece of policy that is workable going forward. So that's the full campaign. I saw the chat blowing up, so I imagine folks have lots and lots of questions. I'm happy to answer them. I do want to drop in the chat just a link to our Take Action. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then reshare it in just a moment to show you our form if you're really excited about this opportunity to go ahead and reach out to your legislators and let them know that you really want to see all three of these bills passed with the frontline leadership that's being shown in this work. And then I'll also drop in the chat just our website address more generally so that folks can sign up for the email list and get alerts as hearings come up and opportunities to mobilize to make this really important work happen. And I totally did not type that correctly, but happy to answer questions.
Oriana, just on that topic, I thank you for all of that, first of all. And then, but on the topic of taking action, just to dwell on that for just a second before we get into the questions here. So it sounds to me like, I mean, is it fair to say that, you know, broadly speaking, you can do these things, you can write to your legislator and support these bills, and one of these links is about that. As Oriana said, there will be hearings throughout the next few months on all of these bills. And a lot of times just showing up to those hearings shows interest from the public, which is useful, but you can also make comments written and sometimes oral. Is there anything else? I mean, I think since we're in pandemic times, we don't meet on the Capitol steps the way we used to, But is there anything else that you might want to just mention if I didn't characterize that correctly in terms of the opportunities people have to support these pieces of legislation?
So additional opportunities to support the legislation. I think the best thing to do is go to those links I dropped in the chat and sign up for our email list. So you can be notified of opportunities to mobilize. Unfortunately, like packing a hearing room is not really possible on Zoom or Teams. So that support is not as helpful, but submitting a lot of written testimony, using our Take Action form to reach out to your legislators is important. And we'll need a really good push, even if we can negotiate a policy that doesn't have really strong opposition and is likely to be bipartisan. Rep. Owens from Southeastern Oregon, a Republican, has been working with Helm on his concept. So there's already some Republican momentum around the 100% concept. So we're pretty confident that in particular, the way we're messaging, and we're messaging more of this as an energy than a climate bill, even though it will have really good climate benefits, that we can bring along some Republicans in the process and ensure that a bill that is just common sense at this point, that provides really good economic opportunities for communities and puts people back to work in physically distant jobs that are easily done in physically distant ways, really leverage that right now.
That's fantastic. It was also stuck out to me, that map that you showed of the energy burdened communities, and that overlaps really dramatically with what is typically Republican territory. I think just shows another awesome opportunity to have some bipartisan action against this. Do you want to, I know there were some questions in the chat about that, but do you want to just maybe speak to that? Because I think that's a really encouraging potential opportunity there.
Oh, sorry, could you repeat the question? My audio is a little funny.
I was just saying that the map you showed about the energy burdened communities, the ones that are most energy burdened overlap heavily with Republican territory. And so can you just talk a little bit maybe to the opportunity for bipartisan action against that?
Yeah, so this bill in particular, House Bill 2475, is likely to pass out of the House Energy and Environment Committee with a unanimous vote. We got bipartisan support last session. We had 11 Republicans who voted in favor of the bill on the House side, and we're going to pick up at least 2 Senate Republicans, Knopp and Hansel, and we expect to get their votes again. The politics of session are a little bit better on this bill, so we might even pick up more Republicans. And I think it's just really seen as something that's going to impact communities. It's focused on investor-owned utilities because consumer-owned utilities already have the option to create differentiated rates, and we may want to do a bill in the future that requires it more. But this is the first step to open up a door that's been locked for a portion of the state. Like, for example, Klamath County, which is one of those really red areas, is Pacific Power territory. So is Jefferson County and a little bit of Crook County. So we know that we can have really good impacts for rural communities who, I think someone noted, are frontline communities, and we feel that very, very strongly, especially on this energy affordability front. Healthy Homes has also received bipartisan support in past sessions, and is likely, we already have a Republican on it, which helps with caucus issues and keeps it off of the kill list. If you have a Republican who's really willing to be vocal and supportive, which Zika is on these first 2 bills, and is interested in the 100% clean bill as well. And there are other Republicans who are circling it with some interest, because again, they see that economic opportunity to their communities. This red heat map of energy affordability need is also pretty similar to where our best solar and wind resources in the state. So we can also affect energy affordability by helping people to get good jobs in the clean energy space, and really take advantage of that resource by ensuring that we're putting more local projects into our system rather than buying a lot of Montana wind and bringing it in through a transmission line and helping communities in Montana, but not the people in our own backyards and in communities around the state.
Thank you. That's so refreshing to hear the opportunity for some bipartisan action against these really important things. There's some questions here about access to some of these materials. And we will be sending anyone who registered to the webinar information about the presentations, and also some of these call to action suggestions. We'll be following up with all of this too. So in case you missed it or didn't get a chance to jot it down, we'll send that to you. Maybe we should turn this over to just a broad Q&A. So
yeah.
let's stop sharing our screen and bring Morgan in here. And Morgan, thank you. You've been doing a outstanding effort. I don't know if you knew what you were signing up to. That was way more questions than I thought we would get, but I love the energy from the audience here. So thank you for those questions.
That's okay. Yeah, Brian, if I could just jump in for just a minute. And first off, I'll apologize for a second. My power went out here in Northeast Portland, so I switched over to my phone. So I did miss, I think, possibly 1 or 2 questions. So apologies there. We have gotten a lot of questions, which is fantastic. And I'm wondering if maybe we can kind of just go through a few of them. I think our maybe that our panelists can answer. Or Brian, do you have a different idea?
No, I think that's a great idea. I would love to do that. I also want to, before I forget, I wanted to bring up one topic that we haven't talked much about today, but I think is kind of lurking in the background on a lot of these things, which is campaign finance reform. And I wonder if you, who are more close to this than I am, at least could maybe make some comments. Are we likely to see anything on that front? You know, because that campaign finance has been one of these things that's been a stickler for enabling us to get the kind of right representation for some of these policies in the past. Is there anything there that's worth talking about, or should we move on?
Yeah, I guess I'll add briefly that actually last session during I think maybe one of the first special sessions, there was some campaign finance legislation that was passed, and actually with some bipartisan support, which was really great. And so there is, I think, much greater interest and mobility on that work. Representative Dan Rayfield and Senator Jeff Golden have been really excellent leaders on that. So I think there are definitely steps in the right direction, and more of that conversation continuing. I also wanted to add, I know Albert Kaufman had a question in the Q&A about how to best support, because there is a lot of lobbying action on all sides of this work. And I will not miss an opportunity, Albert, if you would like to help support the organizations that are doing this work. We certainly won't say no, because there is certainly many folks working for and against this work. So thank you for your support, Albert. But yes, campaign finance is certainly important, and I think is moving along more so than it has previously.
And I would add to that, the Oregon League of Conservation Voters was on the steering committee for the statewide ballot measure that amended the Constitution, that kind of opens up the door to enacting statewide campaign contribution limits. So that's, and it was passed with a massive majority of voters across the state. So the legislators, I think, are hearing that message pretty loud and clear, and will be working on, I think, a new slate of campaign finance reform bills. It's going to be interesting to see if anything can get all the way across the finish line. And I know that there are groups who have been engaged in that space for that statewide ballot measure, who would be prepared to go to the ballot with something regarding limits if something doesn't come out of the legislature. So I do think that there's going to be movement on that one way or another, and it just remains to be seen how it actually plays out.
Can I jump in with one question? Paulette has a great question in Q&A saying, how can we follow the schedule of these hearings of these bills? And that's something I would heartily recommend for anyone. If you go to the legislative website, which is oregonlegislature.gov, and I will put that in the chat. And then in the upper right, there is a box that says OLIS, which stands for Oregon Legislative Information System. And then you can search for bills and you can track them and sign up to get email alerts, which I definitely recommend. And I will in the chat kind of throw in some links for how to do that. So I just wanted to put that out for everyone of kind of following the hearings, following bills. You can sign up to get notifications from the committees for their agendas, as well as for each of the individual bills.
Thank you for that. I'm sure other people here might have some things they want to offer up. I was just thinking one of the questions I thought was really interesting in the chat that might be worth elevating a little bit was around the question of working with the organizations that represent some of the trades that might be left out of the transformation as we move away from fossil fuels towards clean energy. You know, there is a reshifting of our workforce, and Oriana mentioned some of the retraining opportunities that are embedded in some of these bills. But would any of you like to tackle that topic of just how we're working with the people who represent some of those trades that might be left out of some of these future opportunities?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. So Blue Green Alliance and the Building Trades Council, while neither has officially endorsed any of the bills, have been working closely with our campaign to help shape labor standards. There's no specific just transition language that transitions folks from say a natural gas power plant job to a solar job. And I think a lot of tensions that come up around that, because maintaining a natural gas power plant includes jobs that are kind of more consistent day to day, whereas solar, you build the project and then there's not a lot of maintenance associated with it. So it's a little bit more like project by project jobs. And there's less stability in the eyes of a lot of labor folks around that issue. But I think there are good opportunities around offshore wind, which creates a lot of labor jobs. And there's been a really good alliance in New York State around offshore wind between labor and environmental advocates. And then something I've heard from labor is actually like the healthy homes work and doing zero energy or net zero retrofits of public buildings. Like just creating a lot of local jobs in communities is how we make the transition happen. And labor really cares about things being real. So that's a challenge in policy making, is you can't always say, hey, we're going to put this many jobs in this community, this many jobs in that community. But one of the federal things we'll be advocating for in conjunction to some of the federal funding we want to fund community energy incentives and healthy homes, and kind of make sure all of the things that we're trying to do are back funded and really supported, is also try to get some funding for public buildings to do those retrofits. Because there's a lot of work that could be done on that front, and labor's excited about it. So it's less like saying, hey, person who's working for a natural gas power plant, come on over here, and we're just creating the opportunity and letting communities have self-determination. Because it doesn't always feel good to have someone tell you that you're working at an industry that's doing harm and you should quit your job. And if you're someone who is, you know, more working class, that's not always an accessible opportunity. So it's really about creating the opportunity. That's why we're the Oregon Clean Energy Opportunity Campaign, and helping people to see themselves in this future and helping to make that transition really meaningful and real for folks.
Right. There's a question I think near and dear to our hearts at Electrify Now. It says, are there any bills this session relating to building electrification beyond just efficiency? And would the REACH code option apply to electrification too?
Morgan, do you want to, I have a little bit of understanding of that, or Morgan, do you want to jump in on that, or do you want me to tackle that one?
Why don't you start, Brian, and I'll head in.
Okay. There, you know, one of the things that's true about Oregon is cities do not have the ability to mandate any kind of building code standards that are beyond the codes that are in the state code. So one of the bills that's being introduced would enable two things that are really important. One, that would mandate that the REACH code, which is a voluntary code right now in the way Oregon means, what that means is it's a little bit of a hint of what's coming in the future, but it's a voluntary prescription. There's some, you don't have to obey the REACH code. But one thing is that the REACH code has to be 10% more energy efficient in terms of on-site energy consumption than the standard code. That's one thing. And the second thing is that it allows any city to adopt that code as their standard code, which is a really big deal. I think in the first version of this, it won't mean that cities will be able to mandate all electric construction, for example, but it will mean that if they adopt the REACH code, all electric construction suddenly becomes much more attractive to builders, because it's going to be a lower cost way for them to hit the targets that are required under the building codes for efficiency. So, and then the REACH code will get more stringent every 2 or 3 years as the codes are updated. So I think what this does is it creates a path for cities to really get more aggressive, if they choose to, about decarbonizing their new building stock. So I'm excited about it. It isn't the knockout blow that a lot of people might want in terms of just mandating all electric construction or something like that. It's not that, but it certainly is a big step in that direction. So I'm excited about it. Morgan, chime in if I missed anything.
No, I think that's great. I think, tackling how we move to electrification is going to be a kind of multi-part process through building codes, through allowing local municipalities to go above and beyond. And a lot of it is creating that opportunity for local municipalities to make that move and to remove the layers of preemption that currently exist in certain areas. There was a question it was either the chat or the Q&A about ETO incentives are only allowed in certain areas. That's within the jurisdiction where the folks are customers of the investor-owned utilities. And so it's a good point that there's work to be done to work with those co-ops and the municipal power entities to try and create programs there. So I'm not really a direct add there, but just saying that a lot of this is kind of trying to work on the policy in the particular space that we can and try and help meld them together to create more opportunity.
Great, we're just coming up a couple minutes past 2. Why don't we do 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll try to respond to any other ones in the follow-up email. Brian, do you have any, or Morgan, do you have any that look great to answer?
Morgan, anything jumping off the page to you? There's so many questions here, and I've been barely keeping up with the questions myself.
Yep, I cheers to everyone for being very active and engaged. I appreciate that. There was one from Linda about addressing the 2/3 quorum requirement. And I would just kind of comment there as well that, much of the work that is done that is revenue raising does require a 2/3 quorum. And so there is, I think, much broader beyond our organization's work to, establish a simple majority quorum requirement. But that does take a lot of work and a lot of organizing. And so I want to say I deeply appreciate all of the enthusiasm by everyone in the chat and in the questions, and to also acknowledge that, I think we're working kind of as fast as we can from an advocate standpoint, and welcome the encouragement and the support. So yes, there is work on that, and it is, I would say, broader beyond the environment and environmental justice communities to many of the advocate organizations across the state. And there was another kind of question specific to certain legislators. I would say that building a relationship with your local legislator can be really impactful. And I don't want to understate how important it is for folks to reach out, to build a relationship with your local legislator and get to know them and to get to know what they're interested in. And so that they can also get to know that you're very interested in this work. I think it actually is very, very impactful. And I know we're running up on time. I will offer on my behalf, I'm certainly happy to answer additional questions over email. So that's kind of what I can offer at this point.
Well, maybe we can wrap this up. I think Joe and I are going to have some work to do to put together a list of references for all of you. We always send out a package to all the registrants for the email to the webinar with links to the recording and the copies of the presentation slides. So you all get that. We're going to put our heads together, and with the help of Oriana and Julia, and Morgan, get some good links for you too on how you can follow these things, how you can advocate for them, et cetera, because I'd love it if we can turn the energy from this webinar into some loud voices to our legislative representatives to get this stuff done. So first of all, just to wrap this up, I want to thank all of our panelists. That was fantastic. It's really important for people to hear from experts like you. So thank you for the time. And thank you to everyone in the audience for hanging in there with us. And I think, I hope you were not frustrated that you didn't get your question answered. I hope we were able to do at least a decent job at answering your questions. And Joe, anything else to add here?
No, just our final line. Good luck on your electrification projects, and we'll see you in 2 weeks for renewable hydrogen. Thank you all so much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.